we serve. If you don't mind just lifting your hands all over the building. It's our time of surrender. Who can stand against the Lord? No one can. No one will. Who will stand against the King? No one can. No one will. Victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. Victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. Can we say who can stand? Who can stand against the Lord? No one can, no. No one can. No one will. No one will. Who can stand against the King? Who can stand against the King? No one will. No one can. No one will. No one will. Victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. Victory belongs. Oh, who can stand against the Lord? Who can stand against the Lord? No one can, no one can. No one will. No one will. Who will stand against the King? Oh, who will stand against the King? No one can, no one can. No one will. No one will. Victory belongs to Victory belongs to Oh, so we put our trust in you. Yes, we put our hope in you. So we put our trust in you. Yes, we put our hope in you. Hallelujah. We bless your name today, God. We love you so. that God is in control. Victory belongs to Jesus. We believe in you, God. Victory belongs to we trust your word today, God. Victory belongs to we relinquish all of our worries, all of our problems, all of these things, all of our pains, all of our sickness. We give it to you today, God, because we know we win in you. Victory belongs to you. Oh, you said you got up with all power in your hands. That's the power to save, the power to heal, the power to change, the power to deliver, the power of God will. Hallelujah. Victory belongs to him. Oh. So we put our trust in you. Yes, we put our hope in you. So we put our trust in you. Yes, we put our hope in you. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Come on, if you're victorious. Come on, we're in the middle of a series that says do things on purpose. So if you know he's done something great in your life, if you know he's brought you out, if you know he's brought you through, one of the great wonders that's going on in the power of God right now is that it's raining, is that there is thunder, there is lightning. To know that God is still on the throne and he reigns. Today, if you're victorious in him, come on and give him a praise on purpose. Hallelujah. 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 We glorify your name. Hallelujah. We give you glory, God. We bless you, God. In this place, we put our hope in you, God. We put our trust in you, God. We thank you in advance, God. You're so good. Hallelujah. Bless your name.
At this time, we'll have a praise dance. Are they ready? All right.
And the crushing, and the pressing, you'll make it new wine. And the soil I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. So I yield to you and to your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. Make me your vessel. Make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. I came here with nothing, but all you have given me. Jesus, bring the wine out of me. And the crushing, So make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing, but all you have given me. Jesus, renew right out of me. Jesus, renew right. Make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be.
Children, church,
I can't.
Amen, amen. Let's give the Lord a hand clap of praise this morning, please. To God be the glory for all things. Good morning, everybody. You can see what a second of practice does, correct? Way to go, way to go. Who would like to lead us in prayer this morning? AJ, come on, sir.
God, thank you for this day. Thank you for my cousins and my family that came to church today. I hope that all of the church will be happy of how it's Mother's Day and how Mother's Day worked. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're doing well this morning. Guys look nice as always. I want you to repeat after me. I want y'all to say thoroughly immersed. Say thoroughly immersed. All right, that's the title of this speech today, thoroughly immersed. Okay, so we're going to come out of the book of Judges, chapter 7. We're going to read chapter 7, verses 7 through 8. And it reads, "And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go every man unto his place." In verse 8 it reads, "So the people took victuals in their hand, and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley." Okay, so say it again, say thoroughly immersed. So before I actually get into the story, I want to tell you what the word immersed means. Immersed means to be fully engaged or committed to something. And I'll give you an example. When you go swimming, can you simply go swimming by sticking your foot in the water? Does your whole body have to be in? The whole body, right? That's being immersed. So I want to talk about that because when we talk about Gideon, Gideon was a military leader, a judge, and a prophet. All right, and he was called by the Lord to help his people overtake the Midianites. Now the Midianites were this strong army that had over about 140,000, 150,000 soldiers. And now Gideon started off with 10,000 soldiers. So you'll say, man, 140 is a whole lot more than 10,000, right? Whole lot more. You know what God told Gideon? 2,000 is too many. And he said, I'm going to remove some of them. He said, how many do we have now? He said, well, we have about 2,000 or 3,000. He said, that's still too many. So when he says the people that lapped, God wanted those men who were able to drink water and lap like a dog but still keep their eyes on the enemy.
But somebody who kneeled down and drank off their knees and they weren't looking, he sent them home because they weren't prepared for battle. So you guys know how many people Gideon actually had to fight over 140,000 men? 300. 300. 300 of Gideon's people and the Lord's people to fight the Midianites. And who do you think won? Gideon won, absolutely, because God was with him. But I want you to realize something. It's because those 300 men, those 300 soldiers were thoroughly immersed in what God called them and Gideon to do. And I want to share the story with you guys. I'm a member of the greatest fraternity in the world, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And when I was in college, I had to learn a poem called Members versus Men. And a part of that poem says that the value of our fraternity is not in numbers, but in men. Because it says 8 men thoroughly immersed in the true Omega spirit are a far greater asset than 80 with lukewarm enthusiasm. So if I send this whole crowd of young men and women up here before me to go witness to this city about the Lord, and you guys are kind of lukewarm, which means, yeah, we don't really care if we win souls to Christ, it's not going to be effective. But if I send one little man right here, 3-year-old, and he's on fire for God, it's going to be effective because he's thoroughly immersed. So when you look at 140,000 to 300, it seems like there's no comparison. But there is no comparison when you allow God to use you as Gideon did and take those 300 that were thoroughly immersed, fully committed to what they had to do. Amen? Amen. All right. Good job, guys. Would you like to close us in prayer, young man? Well, come on.
I wanted to take me back, and I just have to sound this Jesus name. Amen.
God be dismissed. Good job.
I've asked Minister Megan to bring the word.
Amen.
Good morning, Spirit-filled. Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. To Pastor Baker, fellow ministers, members, and friends, it is with great pleasure and honor that I stand before you today to teach and preach God's word. And I really thank Pastor Baker for giving me this opportunity today to bring the message. Our scriptural context for the sermon this morning is 2 Kings 4, verses 8 through 37. The scriptural text that I want to emphasize is 2 Kings 26. And it reads as follows. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, it is well with thee. Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. The title of my sermon is, It Shall Be Well With Thee. Lessons from the Shunammite Woman. Now, you may be seated. This is a rather lengthy narrative, so we're not going to read it. I will read a few verses from part 1 of the narrative, and then I will summarize it in the emphasis of just saving some time. Now, this sermon is based on the biblical narrative of the Shunammite woman. And this story is extremely rich in biblical truths. And it is one of the most inspiring and insightful narratives in the Old Testament. It is a story about service, hospitality, compassion, contentment, faith in God, and yes, tragedy. But it is also a story about resurrection and restoration and God's miraculous blessing to those who are faithful to Him. So I'm going to read chapter 4, verses 8 through 10. One day Elisha went on to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, "Behold, now I know that this is a holy man of God, who is continuously passing our way. Let us make a small room on the roof with walls, and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that whenever he comes to us, he can go in there." So now the first part of this narrative begins in 2 Kings 8 through 17. In summary, one day Elisha went to Shunem. Shunem was a city in the valley of Jezreel, in the heart of the Israelite population who were Baal worshipers. Elijah was the assistant to the great prophet Elijah, whom the Lord had taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. While Elisha was in Shunem, a very prominent woman persuaded him to eat at her house. And afterward, whenever he passed that way, he ate and dined at her home. She perceived that Elijah was a holy man of God, and she asked her husband if they could prepare a room for him and put a bed, a chair, and a candlestick and a table in the room. So whenever he was in Shunem, he would have some place to stay. And her husband agreed. During one of the visits, Elisha asked his servant to tell the woman that he wanted to speak with her, and she came and stood before him. Elisha instructed his servant to tell the woman that they appreciated her kindness and to ask her what could be done for her, and also to ask her if she would like Elisha to speak to the king or the captain of the host on her behalf. But the woman answered, "No, I am perfectly content." He offered to make her known to people in power and position, but she declined because she was content in the situation where she was. Elisha still wanted to do something to show his appreciation for the woman and what she had done. So he asked his servant, "What can we do for her?" And his servant said, "She has no children and her husband is old." So in those days, barrenness was thought of as a curse and was considered to be a great tragedy. So out of compassion for the woman, Elisha announced to her that she would have a child about the same time the next year. Now, this was so astonishing to her. She asked him, "Please don't tell me this if it's not true." She didn't want to get her hopes up and be disappointed. But she miraculously conceived and had a child the next year. Now, the second part of this story occurred many years later. One day, when the child was grown, he was working with his father in the fields. And apparently he had some kind of sunstroke, because the Bible said he complained that his head was hurting. So his father told one of the servants to take him to his mother. And when he got to his mother, he sat on his mother's lap until about noon, and then he died. So what did the mother do? What she did is she went up to Elisha's room, and she laid him on the bed. And she shut the door, and she went out. Now, this reveals something very important about this woman. That is her faith in God and in the man of God. She didn't run around screaming. She didn't run to the neighbors and my child is dead. What am I going to do? She went to God and she trusted him. She called her husband and she asked for a servant and a donkey that she may go to Elisha. Her husband asked, why are you looking for Elisha when it is neither new moon or Sabbath? During that time, the new moon and Sabbath were days in which the prophets would call people together for instructions and edification. Her husband appeared to be astonished that she would go to the prophet other than at that time, and other than at the time of the Sabbath and the new moon. But he did not know, nor did she tell him that her son had died. Her response to her husband was simply, it will be well. The Shunammite woman found Elisha on Mount Carmel. You remember Mount Carmel. It was the mount in which Elijah had a fight, I guess you may call it, with the prophets of Baal. Of course, we know that Elijah won that contest. So when Elijah saw her from a distance, he said to his servant, there is the Shunammite woman. Run and meet her and find out what is her problem. See if she, her husband, or the child is all right. She told the servant that everything was fine. But when she came to Elisha, she fell at his feet. The servant began to push her away, but Elisha said, leave her alone, for something is deeply troubling her. So Elisha told his servant to take his staff and go quickly and lay it upon the child. But the Shunammite woman would not leave Elisha until he went back home with her. When they arrived, there was no life in the child. Elisha went in the room and prayed to the Lord. He laid upon the child's body and placed his mouth upon the child's mouth. Then he walked in the house and he went up and down in the room. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha called his servant and told him to call the Shunammite woman. And when she came, Elisha said, take up thy son. So she went in and fell at his feet and took up her son. So this woman, she refused to be delayed. She refused to be stopped. She refused to listen to the servant. She went straight to the man of God for her help. And she refused to leave his presence until he came with her. So there are many lessons that we can learn from the Shunammite mother. But we will consider 3. And they are hospitality, contentment, and persistence. First, let's take hospitality. Hospitality is the generous and cordial reception of guests. Share your resources with others. Romans 12:13 says, share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. The Shunammite woman was hospitable. Verse 8 says that she persuaded Elisha to eat at her house. So she had to convince Elisha to eat. She had to say, please come and eat at my house. She had to show that she genuinely wanted him to come. And out of her abundance of resources, she gave to him. She made a room for him to stay when he was in town. 1 Peter 4:8-9 says, above all, love one another deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. So we see this kindness and this compassion and this love in the Shunammite woman. And it is a lesson for us today that we can imitate, that we can practice. It's a very practical lesson. And secondly, learn to be contented with what you have. The Shunammite woman was content with her life, even though she was barren, which was considered a curse, as I've already said. But she wasn't bitter, anxious, or desperate to change her situation. When Elisha asked what did she want him to do for her, she did not even mention her desire for a child. She just expressed her contentment with her condition and her situation in life. She said, basically, I dwell among my people. And in the Message Bible, it says, she said, no, I am perfectly content. But God saw her unfulfilled needs, and he met them. Through Scripture, we are commanded to be contented with all that we have in life. Contentment is a state of feeling satisfied. Hebrews 13:5 says that, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Because God has said, I will never leave you, never will I forsake you. And what this really is saying is that God is your source, that all other things change, but he is immutable. He changes not. He's the same forever. And if you have God, then you have more than you have if you just have possessions. And Paul says in Philippians 4:11-13, not that I speak from want. I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am in. And the Holy Spirit tells us in 1 Timothy 6:6-8, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we will carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, let us be content. And thirdly, be persistent and do not give up. The woman refused to be deterred. She didn't even let her husband deter her. We don't know exactly why she didn't tell him, but maybe he would have discouraged her. He would have said, you can't find the prophet today. You shouldn't go looking for him. Now it's not new moon. It's not the Sabbath. So she kept it to herself. She just said, all is well. And what we need to understand is that she made a positive confession in the midst of tragedy. And she showed that she trusted God above everything else and above anyone else. That she put God first. Amen. She would not be delayed either. When Elisha's servant came to meet her, she didn't let him stop her. She just continued on and talking to Elisha. She fell at his feet. That's a position of being humble. She humbled herself before the man of God. And she made her request known to him. And this is an example of what we need to do in prayer. Make our requests known unto God. Now, we know that he knows all things, but he has told us specifically to pray. And prayer is basically just asking God for what we need and for what we want. And she refused to leave Elijah's presence until he came with her. Refuse to leave the presence of God until you get an answer. Be persistent in prayer. The Bible tells us in Galatians 6 through 9, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Just be persistent. There's a story that I heard about a woman whose son had a fever. And so she prayed all night long, and early in the morning, the fever broke. And that was during a time when, they didn't have all the medications that they have today. And she said, what would have happened if I had stopped praying before dawn? But she persisted in prayer, and her son was saved from the fever. And in Luke 11, 9, and 10, it says and reminds us and admonishes us, ask and it shall be given. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened. In summary, we can learn these 3 lessons from the Shunammite mother. Be hospitable and share your resources with others. Be content with what you have. And lastly, be persistent and don't give up. And if you do these things, you can say, as the Shunammite woman said, all will be well. I'd like to extend an invitation to accept Christ to those of you who do not know Jesus in the pardoning of your sins. If there is anyone today who is not saved and you want to make Jesus the Lord and Savior of your life, the doors of the church are now open.